You are listening to the North American Kings podcast, your traditional masculinity training ground. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski, founder of North American Kings LLC, a leadership development company based in Cincinnati, Ohio. As we all know, the man brand has taken an absolute beating over the past few decades, and it's our mission to change that. We're going to do that by helping you join the fight to reclaim traditional masculine values. Welcome to headquarters. Training starts now. Welcome back to the training ground, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski. I'm very excited to do this show with you today. I think it's going to be a very potent episode, so let's get started. First, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Naked Armor Razors and Wet Shave Gear. This company is as solid as they come, with killer customer support and education material available to any and all who would like to enjoy their straight razor shave. Now, you might ask, why the need for educational material? The answer is quite simple. Straight razor shaving is coming back. Now, with no one teaching men how to use straight razors these days, Naked Armor has taken it upon themselves to host a library of videos, articles, and even flowcharts on a number of shaving-related topics. Never held a straight razor? Don't worry, I hadn't either before I made my first purchase. Now, this service will teach you what you need to do with your tool and how to enjoy a great quality shave. And for my listeners, you can enjoy a 15% discount using coupon code KINGS15 when you decide to give it a shot. Don't wait to start enjoying the highest quality shave you'll ever give yourself. NakedArmorRazors.com. Now, I want to start this show off on a positive note. So, an article from the Daily Mail, a Michigan cop rescues an unconscious man from burning car in the middle of busy interstate after a rollover crash. Man, it's a little long headline, right? Now, a link to the video and the article can be found in today's show description. Now, Officer Luke Pauley of Detroit was the first to arrive on the scene of this flipped car scene. He hears a woman yelling that there's someone trapped in this car. This car is engulfed in flames. Like passenger seat, like there's flames everywhere. Now the driver made his way to the passenger's seat in like the front portion of the cabin, but failed to get the doors open. In the video, you can see him hanging like over and halfway out of that half-raised door window. Now, towards the raging fire runs Officer Polly, who was actually able to pop the door open and drag this man to safety. And we can hopefully say, again, this is a pretty fresh article. Right now, the driver looks like he's going to make it. But again, it's early. We don't have confirmation of that yet. So for courage in the line of duty, let's raise this man up, Officer Luke Pauley, to the pedestal of manhood. Thank you for your service. Now, I just got done watching the new Amazon movie, The Tomorrow War, like starring Chris Pratt. And I've got to give this movie a solid A-. With one exception, I absolutely love this film. Beyond the action, plot, and even the special effects, I got to give it to both Chris Pratt and to Jonathan Kimball Simmons in this movie. Now, I mean, you guys probably know this. I mean, I've talked about him a couple times. Chris Pratt's a personal hero of mine, and not for any of like the political stuff, not for, his funny, goofy attitude. It's not even the movies he makes. Like, this guy rocked the dad bod early in his career. It's like, if you guys remember Parks and Rec from a while back, he had a body just like mine. And there are a couple of scenes where I'm like, is that what I look like? And he just rocked it. And Chris has gone through several interviews after he made like his transformation, and he's talked at length about the psychological and emotional like differences he sees in himself now that he's in shape and when he started getting in shape, and the difference between how he felt before. And like, he went from dad bod like Shrek to this shredded superstar, starting with his movie, or the one that we saw it in, where primarily was the Guardians of the Galaxy. And it gives me hope, right? And where I'm trying to get healthier, as you guys have heard. But I also got to give kudos to Jonathan Simmons, because in this movie, and I'm talking the farmer's guy, like we are farmers. Da, 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 da. That guy, we cover a lot because we've seen a lot. That guy who also played Jonah, I think Jonah Jameson in the Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire. This guy, this guy, like he's been in the business for a long while. He plays Ripped Santa. And it's awesome. Like, it's awesome to see a gentleman with this level of experience to be in that good a shape. Like, I couldn't tell you, like if it was gained for the movie or if it's been under that farmer's suit that he wears, that insurance salesman suit. But holy cow, like, color me impressed, right? But this kind of struck me this week because, I mean, it leads directly into today's episode. I've got to say, the original, like, it works well on the positive side, but I've got to say, like, I was performing my familial duties earlier this, past couple weeks, and I saw something that made me physically angry. All right? Now, I needed to calm myself angry in public, which doesn't happen much. Like, there's not a lot in public that can make me angry. It doesn't happen that way. But this one struck me. Now, I was at the top of these bleachers, like the nosebleeds, and it was kind of on purpose. And I was there at the top of these bleachers. Across the way, I see this wildly obese dude making his way up the stairs. Now, again, his whole person made me angry, but it's not for the reason that you think you've puzzled out yet. Okay, so just bear with me. First, I got no issue with big people. Okay, some of the nicest folks I've ever met. Okay, my problem was with this guy was his physique, but it's also along with like the t-shirt he was wearing. Okay, it was a giant brown desert tan t-shirt, and in black letters across the front, it read "Busy doing nothing" in capital letters. That's what made me angry. Like, take either of those things separately, and I'm grand. Right, big dude, no problem. Short with some attitude. Even as a people manager, they're mildly funny. I mean, I've had employees wear a shirt to work that said, "Here not working." Like, it works. I mean, it's mildly funny, but whatever. It's not a bother. But for this particular guy to be wearing this billboard proclaiming his acceptance of being morbidly obese, that never sits well with me, right? And it shows me a guy who's either given up or is so mentally stuck that there's little hope left. And on either hand, I'm willing to bet he's probably getting comments from his family and friends like, "Love the shirt," or the lazier but still affirmative "nice." Right? Like, that's not something we should encourage. Like, either way, he's getting validation from somewhere. Validation is important for everyone, especially men. All right? In a lot of ways, like, which, we're going to touch on that today, but this isn't the way to do it. Validation for the wrong things encourage the wrong behaviors, right? We know this. This is not rocket scientists, but you can't tell your kids good job for breaking their toys and expect them not to break their toys on purpose in the future. And that's the key. Like, we learn behaviors. The same thing goes with person's interpersonal relationship. Now, especially given a meatball opportunity like this, right? Dude, is that the shirt you want to be wearing? It's a little too on the nose, isn't it? And that's, I mean, you might be a jerk, but a jerk friend who's helping you, I mean, we have to ask that question, moral quandary time. Is it worth your friendship to say, "Hey, dude, like, man, like, you're a big dude. Like, do you really want to settle for that?" Now, the arrogance of this guy on top of it, like, that's what drives me nuts. Like, this guy, like, just in my head matched the ideal, like, internet troll who goes on, like, fitness groups on Facebook and trashes guys who are posting progress pics. Busy doing nothing. Yeah, like, we can tell. And the thing is, again, I don't have an issue with bigger folks. Like, I really don't. Big women are attractive to me. Like, curvy women, great. Guys at the gym who are big, I'm never going to knock those guys. Why? Because they're actively trying to fix something, right? I see those guys at the gym all the time. Great. Good for you. I hope you kill it, right? But that's not what we're talking about, okay? We're talking about a person who's just cool being that guy, happy, busy, doing nothing. Now, Proverbs 26, chapters 12 through 15. There is one thing worse than a fool, and that is a man who is conceited. The lazy man won't go out and work. Quote, there might be a lion outside, he says. He sticks to his bed like a door to its hinges. He's too tired even to lift his food from the dish to his mouth. Now, I think in this case, we can say with relative confidence that eating was probably not this dude's problem. But the psychological reasons that this guy, is where he is another thing, right? Like there's an age-old adage, right, that people are a product of their environment, regardless of the amount to which people are affected by their environment. That is probably still up for debate. Like, hey, if I'm mired with all these people around, am I going to be just like them within a day or a week or a year? Right? Let's say the amount someone is affected is still variable, but we can all agree that there's actually some impact for real. Now, to that, I have to point out that there's an actual fat acceptance and healthy and any size movement out there. There's two of them, right? And they're there to promote and encourage people to stay at morbidly obese weights. Right, the National Association to Advanced Fat Acceptance, the NAAFA, is just one group. All right, now on their website, NAAFA is an all-volunteer, multi-generational organization looking to change the narrative around fatness, fight for fat rights, and increase respect for all people and all bodies. Now, again, let me repeat myself. I am not advocating for discrimination. I am not. I will state that unequivocally. I am not saying we should be discriminatory. Right? I think we need to take a realistic view of obesity, though. I find curvy women extremely attractive. I mean, I've said that before. I'm not saying that we should not hire folks who are bigger than their competition. But that doesn't mean that we can sit there and truthfully say that being fat is healthy, right? The reason bigger people pay more for healthcare is because there's a real cost that this group denies, by the way. So there's a real cost if you get diabetes, if you develop diabetes, which is directly contributed to being obese. If you contract and get that disease, there is no cure right now. And there's a cost to insulin, there's a cost of care, and then the risk of all these other bodily issues increases dramatically. There's a cost to that, right? So it's not discriminatory to assume that, hey, because you're in this weight profile, you're going to pay more in healthcare. Generally, you will. In some way, it will manifest itself in other ways. So I'm not saying we should discriminate. The one thing I will say, back from and I'm going a little off script here, but back in my college days, it was in an HR class, and this is kind of when I knew I was going to be, that stone cold manager one day. And I say stone cold because the responses I got to this were like, oh my God, look at this evil person. And for my D&D fans, the lawful evil guy, which I don't think I am, but either way. But we were asked a question about reasonable accommodation. So the example given in class was, we've got a train conductor working for the union in subway in New York, a big city. Didn't really mention it. But imagine that person, and this person had this position and gained so much weight that they couldn't fit physically into the seat in the conductor's spot up front, right? So they're driving the subway, they're going to be pushing that lever and doing all the stuff they do. That person couldn't fit in his seat anymore inside the actual cab. What do you do? And we mentioned reasonable accommodations. We mentioned A couple of people were like, oh, maybe we could like, move, change the cabin, which as an engineering type maintenance guy, like back to my roots, like, no, like that's a hard thing to do. Right. So we went through this entire litany example, and I was the guy in the back of the class who raised my hand nice and real tall and said, fire them. Now, this was like sophomore year in college, so no real manager experience at that point yet. But reasonable accommodations can only really go so far. And groups like this NAFA are trying to tell us that, hey, accept everybody for how big they ever are. Which, again, be polite, don't discriminate. But if somebody's eaten themselves out of the job, they've gotten too big for whatever reason to physically fit in a job, and let's say they can't do another job in a desk in an office somewhere, like all the reasonable accommodations are still can't work. Like, what do you do? A person cannot fit. Yeah, we're gonna have to part ways. I'm sorry, it's not a good fit, no pun intended, for either one of us anymore. We need to be able to have those conversations realistically with people, and groups like this NAFA are actually causing like a rift here. They're telling people, hey, you shouldn't be able to tell me I can't physically do my job. Like, even though the reality of the situation certainly shows that I can't fit in the conductor's seat anymore. Well, what do you want us to do? Right. And it's nonsense to think otherwise. So again, I'm not saying that we need to discriminate, but we need to look at this. We need to look at ourselves objectively. And people do a good job of this. And we're going to go into a research paper later that actually shows this. So people have a great realistic view of what they can see themselves. It's how they choose to react to that I actually feel is the problem. So again, from the NAFA website, their fact sheet, quote, or titled, "I am not a disease," which is true. You are not a disease, and even your obesity might not even be a disease. But let's go. But let's move in. Let's move into this fact sheet, okay? And I say that with all the sarcasm that I can realistically muster and still keep the tone of the show light. So, their first sentence: body weight is not a proxy for health. Okay, let me stop right there. Yes, it is. Okay. We just talked about it. Like, body weight is absolutely a proxy for health. Like, it's a good indicator of where someone's at. All right. I've been told I carry fat well. Awesome. Right. But it's still, if you see some Adonis from down the street, well, yeah, that person's probably healthier than me. You could probably weigh everything and probably get closer to the real situation than these guys are trying to let on. Okay, so back to the fact sheet. Assuming so is both unscientific and prejudicial. These assumptions lead to biases and discrimination in education, the workforce, healthcare, family relations, and social dynamics. Physicians' frustrations with their lack of education and resources for treating fat patients results in poor doctor-patient relationships and will not be instantly relieved by declaring obesity a disease. Well, congratulations. The physician's frustration with their lack of education and resources for treating fat patients results in poor doctor-patient health relations. And I just read that their little statement again, like with the sarcasm that it deserves. So the resource that the doctors are lacking is willpower. And the lack comes from the side of the patient, not the doctor. How many times, and I'm this guy. All right. So I'm not saying I'm not saying like, hey, I'm up here and you got like big people are down here. Look, I've had these conversations. I will quote you my chart here in just a minute because it's fascinating. All right. But the idea that how many times have you heard, hey, you're gaining a little weight? Yeah, I've done nothing about that. right? Like the doctor will tell you, hey, you need to lose some weight. You go in 6 months to a year later for another checkup or something, and they're like, hey, you haven't lost any weight. Yeah, I didn't really do it. Now, I'm not asking them for help. I'm saying, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, and the doctor leaves it to you to do. All right. So this business, this advocacy group, is stating that the doctor's lack of education and resources is why they have a poor doctor-patient relationship. Well, if you keep asking for my advice and I give it to you, hey, lose weight, and you, the patient, don't, and you continue to ask me, hey, why is my health deteriorating? Well, I might get frustrated too. And I will keep it professional and stuff like that, but I'm not going to have like the glowing halo faith in the patient anymore, because over and over and over and over again, we see that this lack of willpower to do what's in your best interest. We find that people would rather comfort eat and maintain a lifestyle that they are comfortable with rather than make some of those improvements at the cost of their health. All right. So a lack of this willpower, again, comes from the patient, not the doctor. It's not the doctor's education, and it's not the doctor's resources that are lacking here. All right. Body weight is an absolute proxy for health. If you want to split hairs here, it's the amount of fat versus the amount of muscle that they're driving at. So, okay, body weight, right? You could be a beefy 220, right? Like all jacked, Arnold looking in his prime dude, versus a 180-pound guy with a lot of fat up around his chest and his midsection. All right? The beefy 220 dude, yeah, it's probably healthier, right? And this group goes through details upon details about why body mass index, which actually measures that whole thing, is somehow factually ungrounded. Okay. Go ahead. Like come up with whatever reason that you want. I know folks that don't believe in carbon dating for a bunch of reasons. I don't choose to believe that, right? I think, just everything I've said it works, right? So if we're choosing to pick and stick to a certain group of facts or certain group of observations, and that's gonna like wrap up your whole worldview, fine, right? Like at that point we're arguing in bad faith, and it's just my opinion or your opinion versus somebody else's. All right. But it sounds very much like we're shooting for the gray area. We're trying to find that ambiguous, oh, well, maybe not type of situation. And as men and business leaders out there, I encourage we try to narrow the gray area down to as little of an area as possible. There's always gray in business. There's always gray in decision making, right? Now, I'm more of an A type than some people choose to believe at first, right? I can kind of, I don't say, this is going to be funny, but I swing both ways sometimes, like A-B type, fine. But what I can say is that as a matter of course, I choose to see or to limit the gray area in a given situation to as small an area as possible, so that the things that are truly ambiguous can be treated as such. The things that should not be gray, that are black and white, those should be treated as such, because if you make the wrong decision in those situations, well, you're going to be wrong, regardless of what you chose to view that particular point of the situation in. All right. So I am overweight, right? I am less healthy than anybody else at a normal weight. Like, end of story. Barring wild ingestion of drugs and other things, my like normal lifestyle versus normal lifestyle, I will be considered less healthy than that dude down the street who's just all muscle. All right, regardless of whether he weighs more or weighs less, like on a scale than I do. Okay, so people with more weight tend to have higher blood pressure, lower libido, less endurance, and a higher risk of sleep apnea, diabetes, and stroke. Those aren't good things. Now, why would there be an advocacy group outside of protecting people's feelings? Which is that's a noble thing, like to protect people, to make people happy. That is to make people happy is a good thing, but to protect people from the reality of the situation, that is not a good thing either. So why would there be an advocacy group out there encouraging the root cause of most of these issues? The quote unquote fact sheet continues to debunk issues around dieting and social stigma. Obese people are more stressed. Why? Well, getting winded walking up the stairs is going to be frustrating. All right. I had a medical thing that kept me like out, and walking up the stair, walking down the street. Walking down the street winded me. That feels awful. That's stressful. Right? So to not have a health issue outside of your weight and to have that happen, yeah, that is absolutely frustrating. So why then are we tackling the emotional issues around this? Well, according to the fact sheet, this stress plausibly explains a portion of the BMI Health Association. All right. Well, okay, so they passively admit this, right? Okay, so obese people get stressed, and this stress causes them to seek relief. Right? Food is a stress reliever. Okay. You guys ever haunch into something delicious? Endorphins get released and you feel pleasure. You get less stress. Stress eating is a real thing. And just like any vice, it is a choice, and we should be encouraging good ones. Okay? Again, I'm not trying to rail on people for being overweight. I'm trying to convey that this is not a healthy situation. And folks with advocacy groups out there, and people will accuse this group of being one too, right? Like toxic masculinity shouldn't be encouraged. Well, that's not what we're encouraging, but fine. But there is a pure truth in here. To encourage unhealthy lifestyles is not a moral good. So I will choose to bash on organizations that try to do that. Right? Another item on the sheet mentions is dieting and why it doesn't work. Now, in truth, it's a bit one-sided, but that's actually true. Right? Dieting leads to weight loss, but here's the thing. It does lead to rebounds in weight, which again cause the stress, which cause the eating, which this group is stating is why people should just stay fat or stay unhealthy. Let's say that, like stay unhealthy. Right? What they're missing, and probably because these folks don't do it, like if I'll be honest with you, and I'm assuming that they don't do it, but if there is a really skinny guy at the head of NAFA, I would laugh hysterically for days on days on days. All right. So I'm assuming it's another big person, and this person doesn't diet. And, again, if they don't do it, it's the problem is it's the healthy eating habits that lead to long-term health benefits. Okay. It's not the diet. It's the diet that you do that leads to success, that hopefully leads to a behavioral change. All right. Crash diets and quick programs might help, again, initially, but keeping the weight off is a matter of changing habits surrounding and your mentality. Now, that is a scary thing, right? There's uncertainty. There's fear of failure. You don't want to be the person who failed to lose weight. I know a lot of people who go to the doctor and are scared to get up on the scale. I don't like doing it myself. I don't like doing it because I wear work boots, a work belt. I would like to the doctor. I've got tools on me. I've got heavy boots on. I think that adds maybe 5 pounds to whatever that is, but they take the measurement anyway. Like, hey, we're just trying to see where you fluctuate. You probably wear the same thing in here all the time, which I usually do. But the idea here is that it's still kind of, it makes me anxious. Like, why wouldn't it? Like, hey, did I fail? But I do it anyway. And I get up there, I'm like, whatever. I know the situation, right? But, the fear of failure is real. The fear of failing to meet that goal, which you've told people like, hey, I'm trying to lose weight, and then you don't, like, you think that there's a lot of negative that comes from that. There's really not. And we'll go through an example of here in just a sec, in just a few seconds. My father just told me unsolicited that it's okay for me to switch from extra large shirts to double XL. Ugh. Come on, Dad. Like that's awful. I mean, this was just a few months ago. Like, I'm in my 30s. My dad is still disciplining me. I mean, like he should, man to man. He's like, dude, like, you went up a size. Like, change your shirt size. And I'm like, oh no. I'm like, I absolutely need to go lose weight now. Like, come on, Dad, really? But I also had this another humbling experience at the doctor. Okay, like, and this is real. Like, this is absolutely for real. So I'm reading over the doctor's shoulder, and I'm looking at my chart, and it said, well developed. Okay, so muscular. Awesome. So I'm reading, I'm like, oh, cool, man. I'm like sitting up straight, like, yeah, like, well, well developed. Ugh. And then I look right underneath, like the very next line, like, well developed, two-word sentence, paragraph, next line, please, 2 words, well fed. Oh, come on. Come on. So this dude's a thick dude. Okay. But clearly he's eating a lot. Like, the most humbling experience. Like, I hope, like, for those of you who can see me, and I hope I'm conveying this over the actual audio podcast here. Like, if you could just see the humiliation, just the humbled, oh my God, it happened. Like, slightly deflated. I mean, I'm a confident guy, but the slightly deflated everything that came out of that conversation, I'm like, I even asked her, being serious? She's like, well, yeah. And, so again, I've been there. Like, it happens. Like, no, everybody's got room for improvement, but both of these realizations didn't encourage me to continue those habits, right? Whether or not I lost weight or not, like, it's like I took it on the chest and just kept going. I mean, I have this lifestyle for a reason, right? I enjoy cooking. Well, yeah, it means I enjoy my products. Okay. But that doesn't mean that they had to be like, oh man, he's so well developed, even though, like, I can't see the muscles. I can tell it's there because he's just thick. You know what I mean? Like, that has a totally different connotation than what just happened. Right? So the bigger point here is that we could pursue and encourage others to live active and healthier lifestyles, and that we should, because it's objectively a better situation long term, and that's the moral good right there. The last thing we should be doing is encouraging obese people to stay busy doing nothing. All right? That shirt to this day makes me angry, because someone is just leaning into it. Yes, I'm going to stay busy doing nothing. Yeah, I cannot continue that. We shouldn't accept that, and that person shouldn't either. Right? But this is a prime example of the issue of sloth. Okay? It's one of the deadly sins. It's the antithesis of a few virtues that we'll discuss here on the show. But sloth, ladies and gentlemen, is the penchant for us to be lazy. The busy doing nothing crowd. All right? Now, that's not the cardinal definition, right? There was a great article on sloth, okay? And it was from a website. That's the link there will be in the show description. According to the article, the root cause of this deeper spiritual problem is fear. Fear of failure, fear of financial cost, fear of physical harm, fear of anything. This fear keeping us caged physically in our homes or from greater opportunities out in the world can build negative habits that feed this emotional place that we're in. All right. Now, from the article, once we find ourselves in that dark wilderness, we try to rationalize where we are and why. All right. The point there is that fear reinforces itself. From an almost scientific perspective, it also de-evolves us in a sense. Now, humans have no real natural predators anymore, right? We did. So they're in our DNA, like in our design, like we have fight or flight mentalities. So when we do run into a predator, like we instinctually know what to feel. Now, that's not to say that animals today can't harm us, but in a broad sense, the only real danger that we face as humans is ourselves or other people. Now, I was outside with our kids the other day, and we were walking under these trees. Like, we were walking up this path, and there were these big trees, and they were teeming with birds, like flocks of them, like little birds, like little chirping sound birds. And I couldn't tell you what bird. I didn't even see them, because of all the leaves and stuff. But they were chirping together and made this really cool sound that it was awesome to observe. And it was particularly enlightening for my children. Like, they were like, oh my, like, there's a lot of birds. Like, we can hear that there's a lot of birds, they were making that observation, like using one sense to kind of populate another. Like, I can't see the birds, but I know I usually see and count a quantity, and I'm hearing that. Like, they kind of made that connection, which is really cool. Now, my sons were a little nervous about the noise because, again, they couldn't trust that they really knew how many birds they were, and they're still like little, so there are predators out there for them. So I told them about the birds, and I told them my sons not to be scared. Now, my oldest asked me why, and I told him because, like, birds really can't hurt you, like, especially, I mean, little ones, like, they're not going to be, it's not a horror movie, from back in the 70s, and that they're more scared of us than we are of them. And he didn't really believe me. He's like, there's so many of them. Why would they be scared? I'm like, well, I told them to watch. And I got right up to the tree, and they're still chirping. And I told my son to just listen. Shh, listen. And he did. He's growing more excited. Like, there's suspense. There's chirping, and there's me waiting, and there's him watching. I told him to watch. And I took a huge breath, and I roared as loud as I could. All right? And I practiced this with my boys. Like, I'm a good roarer. All right? Now, after the roar, there was dead silence. You could hear a pin drop in the wilderness here, all right? And it lasted a few moments in the stillness, and then the birds, like, slowly started chirping. They were probably like, who's this jerk below us? Like, come on, man, right? Then I asked myself, or I asked my son what he heard after I roared, and he said nothing. And I looked at him like, exactly. I explained that when animals hear a predator, they grow quiet, hoping that the thing that they fear doesn't notice them. I asked him, doesn't he get kind of quiet when Dad's mad? And he thought about it. He's like, yeah. I'm like, that's because I'm an imposing looking guy, right? I would expect that, like, when I'm in a mood and I'm like huffing and like I want to destroy something. Like, sometimes people can see that. My son will pick up on that, and he'll kind of shrink back and just keep quiet, like, head down. Dad's mad. Right? The thing our moms back in the 80s and 90s told us to do when Dad just showed up from work. It's like, your dad's home, be quiet. Like, that happened. That happened a lot to most of us. So if that didn't happen to you, I don't even say congratulations, but again, you might be a different person than we are. But you might have a different sense of survival than we do. But the reason I mentioned this, is it kind of brought things to perspective for my son. Like, it's natural to feel that way. Well, for slothful people, given this fear, it is natural to freeze and to remain still when fear overtakes us. The unnatural part of this equation is what these people fear. Now, just like the birds, slothful people hope that by staying low and then and not doing anything, that this emotion, this fear, this whatever badness we feel will move on. We don't want to cause more damage they don't want to cause more damage to the situation by acting improperly, like they're doing the wrong thing, which reinforces itself. So what do you fear? Like, do you fear speaking in public? How about money problems, rejection from friends or the girl you like? Do you fear ghosts? And I'm not being facetious. Like, people fear different stuff. Now, let's hold our emotions in check for a few moments and really examine these situations. Like, what's the downside, really? A poorly given speech. Like, for example, like, worst case scenario, you need to get a little bit better at it, right? And you might lose out on an immediate promotion like if you're at work. Okay? Now, some people will tell you could get fired. Well, that's true if your job depends on public speaking. Right? Like, let's really look at this. If your job let's say as a production manager, like I've been for years, my job is not to public speak. My job is to manage the floor, manage production, manage flow of process, and to participate in problem solving activities, to people manage. Those things, if I can't do those things, yeah, I get fired. Right? That's the job I signed up for. If I can't do it, well, that's the problem. Now, if you give a bad speech and your job, like mine, does not require that I be good at public speaking, like the only downside is someone loses a little bit of confidence in my ability to communicate, and that might be like the deciding factor on something that's going to happen like in a month. Like, hey, Glenn's up for this promotion. Cool. Oh, Glenn just gave this awful presentation. He couldn't explain his ideas to people, which is kind of related to the job he's going to do. I have a little less confidence in him, regardless of all the work that he's done, right? So I might lose out on that promotion, right? But for people who fear this, for people who fear like public speaking in this example, that's not going to be the case. If you fear public speaking, that's not going to be the job that you signed up for. Right? And your job needs you to do it this once. The speech isn't critical to your continued success. That is a fact. So in this example, if that's the fear that's keeping you contained, let it go. And I mean that. Let it go. Like, let those fears be abated. There's nothing wrong. In an objective world, in a rational world, there's nothing in that situation that was going to say, hey, you're going to get fired for giving this bad speech. So now you do the best you can. And if you need to improve later, do it. But do not have that fear that will ultimately cripple you. It's not necessary. Okay, it's not even grounded in reality, right? Another example, you get a bad grade in school. What's the downside? You get maybe a worse grade, maybe, right? If you're a solid B student and you get a D on a paper, like you might go down a couple percentage points. But if you're solidly locked in there, like right in the middle of the range of B, you're not going to go down a grade, right? Like one bad grade isn't going to make or break. It's not a make or break moment. You're not going to fail. When that performance slips. Now, over time, if it's a repeat thing, yeah, you're going to see your grades go down. And that's a culmination of different experiences, but it's not one, you should not fear the one grade. Okay. Now, when you've got something to worry about, if it's a repeat thing that's happening, you're building a behavior pattern. But the fear you feel is the culmination of that failure. All right. Now, the slothfulness of spirit in these situations are due to this self-imposed anxiety. We take our fears to the worst possible places and plan on the worst. Right? Now, we always say prepare for the worst, prepare for the worst, expect the best. Well, we want to prepare for the worst when it's plausible. Worst possible situation. Like, we could always prepare ourselves into this endless cycle of not doing anything. We used to say this in production all the time, right? Hey, safety is our number one priority. However, we can be so safe and eliminate every possible risk, or never be content with the amount of risk that's currently showcased, and we could just not work at all and eliminate the risk completely. Right? And we have to find that balance of assuming natural risk and doing things out there. All right. That's why we continue to say on the show, being able to rationally see the world free of the emotionally driven reactions that will help men make the right choices. Now, another notable feature of sloth goes to its roots in the Latin, roots in Latin. No, aestia, which literally translates to without care. Right? Now, we see where people get to this point where They stop caring about themselves. They stop caring about their duties. Their fear or that emotional, root cause, whatever that is, has kind of morphed from just staying low to an absolute lack of feeling. I could care less about everything. And when I don't care about anything, I don't contribute to anything. And when we don't care about anything and we get to this, we get to that point where we start to really let our duties go, we get to this point where it's now, even with the lack of care, we get to a place where there's a lack of feeling. And indifference here comes from what? A lack of faith, which we also define as a lack of, we also define as despair. And that's not something that we're striving for either. We've mentioned time and time again that having faith is a virtue. Well, it's to counteract this sloth, right? And inactive, slothful men struggle to hold that title, man. They struggle with that. The guy who gets winded climbing to the top of stairs will have a hard time defending the home, right? Protecting his family, or even projecting that he can, right? There are real dangers in the world. My kids, my wife expect me to squash their fear. They do some of that themselves, by rationalizing the situation that we're in. But it's my job as the head of household, the leader of the home, to provide that, right? Now, the guy, again, that guy who can't climb a flight of stairs is probably not going to be able to maintain the house, fix things, build things, teach people, right? And teaching, that is so important, right? That man doesn't inspire. Ultimately, it boils down to that pure truth. Men need to be capable. Ultimately, if we're not capable of stuff, like we're not going to be viewed as much of a man as, let's say, some other people, right? And there are grades of manhood. I'm not going to say that, like you're not manly, but if a guy is capable, he is fulfilling his cardinal responsibilities in a more profound way to more people. Yeah, that guy's more manly. And there are more manly men than me. Like, I'm not saying I'm the ultimate dude up there on that pedestal, but let's be honest. Like, there are grades here, and we have to be able to see that, right? But the reason we even say it out loud is so that we can recognize what we need to improve on personally and improve, right? Like, this is a show of betterment, of help, right? One of the workshops that this business is going to do with folks in our local community here pretty shortly, I'm going to take some people to the gym. And the reason we do that is to teach gym safety, right? There are ways to hurt yourself at the gym. You teach gym safety first, and then you teach people to improve themselves so that when they want to, they can. Right? I had a mentor back when I was 24, taught me how to work out. Awesome. No one had taught me that to that point. And I mean, to really, not just to be active, but to go to the gym and actually enjoy and get something out of a gym experience, which is a completely different thing than, let's say, playing baseball or football, right? Still good things to be doing those, but we learn from those examples. So we're going to be doing that with the local group or the local community so that we can teach people to improve on their ability to do stuff, and how we carry ourselves, right, in both stature and attitude affect how people perceive us, and perceive this ability in us to provide. Now, diligence is the antithesis of sloth, and it's one of the 7 great virtues. Diligence is carefulness and persistent effort of work, right? And it's indicative of work ethic and the belief that work is good in and of itself. And we've talked about this at length. There are examples of diligence specifically in both professional and in several spiritual perspectives. Now, this is because multiple religions have come to this understanding, just as we have, that the good that's inherent in keeping oneself busy and in shape is essential. It keeps the mind sharp and the body ready for unexpected hardship. Dennis Prager, one of the most brilliant philosophers of the modern age, has several theories on the duty one has to act happy, regardless of whether you feel happy or not, to act happy. He stated on his show several times, and I've spoken to him in person about this, that the outward act of being happy is a moral responsibility that we have, a duty, because our outward happiness has an active effect on others, right? Mood itself is contagious. So if we're around happy people all the time, you will become more happy. All right. We saw this in the movie Trolls. You had one troll who was like, "Well, I'm not happy," and being around, but forced to be around a bunch of happy people, he became happy at the end. All right. Gotta love Branch, played by Justin Timberlake. All right. Now, if you're around negative people all the time, you will undoubtedly become a more negative person to both to yourself, and you will be more negative to the people around you. All right. So if moods are contagious, then we can draw a relatively firm line from mood to behavior. So for the men out there, we've talked about setting a good example. Why would that be? It's because adolescents and children follow our examples. All right. Now, we've talked about being fit. We've also talked about not, all right? But following an example is huge. Big people raise big kids, and it's tragic, all right? You see that at a restaurant. You see a big dad, big mom, and then waddling behind them, you find big kids who don't know any better. And it's absolutely tragic to see. And I hope those kids turn it around on their own. Right? That's why we're encouraging physical activity here on this show. But moreover, the lifestyle, it's different. All right? Just like fear builds upon itself, so does physical and mental momentum. All right? Now, this is what we're going to dive into in this segment. Okay? Momentum is a huge thing, and it's reminiscent of Sir Isaac Newton's laws of motion. All right? Now, the first law, an object in motion will stay in motion unless some net force acts upon it. Now, there is much more beyond the physical science of this. There's an enlightened article from the Journal of Career Development, psychological momentum and inertia towards a model of academic motivation by Eric Deemer, Pedro De Rosa, Stacy Duan, and Aaron Dotterer. They examine the parallels of psychological momentum and the physics observed in the real world. It is a great article, and I'm glad we found it. Like, I'll be honest with you, when I go through like scholarly articles, sometimes they're behind a paywall, and I'll be honest with you, sometimes I've paid. I'm like, you know what? Whip out the credit card. I need to read this article, and it's a dud. Right? The abstract kind of gave me what I was looking for, at least for this or for something else. Cool. And turns out it was like I paid the $20 or you pay whatever, and it's just not worth it. So this one is free. The link is in the show description. I encourage you to read it. It's a scientifically based, and I love when they do this. I love when scientific researchers, and I've done this before in the manufacturing world, where you take the subjective world around you and you were able to quantify it and put it into numbers and see how the numbers move when different things are applied to them, right? So these academics, and they work in career development, they work in STEM studies. These folks did it, all right? They went through and put numbers to something that's relatively emotional and subjective. It's hard to put those things into numbers. They did that, and they examined it. So it's a great, great article. I encourage you to go read it. Psychological momentum is a crazy phenomenon, specifically because it follows physical traits, but it's not required to. Again, it's all perspective. It's psychological. It's in our heads. So why does the feeling of momentum model the real world described in physics? right? Like that's some stuff that would make you believe in something more, right? Like, why would we do that? Why are we like it's hard to state why. Now, the intro to the physics from the article, quote, Newton's 1687 first law states that an object remains in its state of rest or in motion unless it's compelled by forces to change that state. This principle is also referred to as the law of inertia. Newton's second law explains that a force is necessary to change the state of motion of an object, and that the rate at which the velocity changes is proportional to the force, with the mass being the proportional constant. Mass is then the measurable representation of inertia. The larger the mass, or alternatively, the larger the inertia, the more difficult it is to change that state of motion in an object. Okay? So related to the psychology of momentum, the bigger the idea or the bigger the feeling or the number of people that are all thinking the same thing and moving a culture or physically in a direction is harder. It will take a bigger reaction in the opposite direction to halt that. Okay? So the bigger the idea, it multiplies the force. Like if we have a giant boulder moving slowly, we'll generate more force than a tiny or a smaller one moving faster. All right? Even though it's moving more, right? The more it's got more, you would think it's got more momentum, but the force generated is much less, okay? And again, we're putting physicality behind something that we feel, which again is fascinating, right? So it multiplies the force. Now, this takes place in the workplace a lot. Now, you ever work with a coworker or a classmate or, who is a downer in the group? Like, did that presence slow things down? I'm willing to bet that it has. I've experienced that. I've also experienced a killer leader in those groups, and not always me, right? And that leader, like, hey, speeds things up. Hey, you're going to do this. Go do that. You're going to do this. Let's go do this. I'll do this. You do this. How can I help? And that person kind of pushes some things along. It gives us positive momentum. All right. So back to the article. Consistent with psychological momentum theory, or PMT, we argue that the value of an activity the individual wishes to perform is related to the psychological mass of that activity, such that if the individual individual manages to reach a state where the activity is performed with high frequency or more speed, it will be easier to continue performing the activity, i.e., high inertia or high momentum state inertia, HMSI. On the other hand, difficulty in implementing a behavior due to insufficient cognitive or emotional resources would be a reflection of psychological mass in the low activity state or the low momentum state inertia. The perceived value of the activity thus explains what may seem a contradiction. That is, an individual who finds it hard to acquire a behavior may also find it easy to continue in a high performance state once reached. Okay? I know that was a mouthful, and I'm sorry I botched some of that. The paper concludes that after some academic research for low momentum state inertia students needed less of a push to make considerable progress. All right? Now, this tracks with something that we've mentioned a few weeks ago here. The hardest step to take in any plan is the first one, but the most important is the second. The second step helps propel you to the next greater step with greater ease and more progress. Listening to that article, we can hear them say it, right? Like once we get moving, it's easier. We've gotten some momentum. Like once we've broken through that wall, that little thing, that cognitive thing that kind of keeps us from moving. that the whatever that is. Once we've broken through that, we start to gain some mass momentum. It starts to become easier to do that. So even if learning a new language, for example, it's a hard thing to comprehend, but once we understand a little bit, and once we make those steps and we become used to it, and even lifting or whatever we do, again, we do these physical things, we do these mental exercises, the more we do it, the easier it becomes. And the easier it becomes, the more we can gain when we do it. So it's a multiplier state. Now, what's happening in the brain, physiologically speaking, is we're building new neural pathways, right? So neuron fires, electric current moves here, moves to this next one, moves to here, and tells our brains to do that whole thing. Well, there's a physical process where those neural pathways actually become more rigid. There's more neural fibers that go in that direction. And when that happens, it becomes easier physically for us to make those decisions. I think in a certain way. It's because I continue to think in that way. I'm physically creating, my body's saying, hey, this guy works in this way. Well, you know what? We're going to make it easier for him to do that. It's a crazy function of design. And in this state, we can see momentum. Hey, it's getting easier for me to do this. It's getting easier for me to lift that weight. I'm building muscle. It's getting easier for me to think in this way. Why? Because I'm thinking in that way before. I'm building capability. Now, I've had a theory over the past several years, and I want to lay at your feet here. I've called it the theory of self-imposed emasculation. Effectively, it states that every man needs to be the alpha at one thing, at least one thing, within their personal sphere of influence. It helps build confidence in the individual and increases the stores of confidence that can be used to sustain a person between moments of reinforcing self-esteem boosting. All right. Now, here's an example. In my social group, I am the people manager. All right. There is perhaps one friend that I have that is also a people manager, and he was my lieutenant for years. All right. So in most conversations, if he's not involved, I'm the only guy. So in conversations about work that get to topics of employees or management, I have relevant information to add with a degree of confidence far higher than in other subjects. Now, the stores of confidence that I build in these interactions sustain me through the events that happen that will kind of drain on that confidence until we hit the subject matter again. All right. Now, finding this one thing is incredibly important to do early. It tracks with that PMT, that psychological momentum theory. When boys and men have at least one thing in which they compete well in, or better yet, dominate in, we find that they'll be able to spend that confidence elsewhere and are likely to branch out into other avenues. Like if you're the best actor in school, right? Like you're shy, but somehow you're the best actor, right? You can prove that. You will become more confident. And when you decide, or let's say that you're outgoing, okay, you're the best actor in school, and you prove like time and time again, you're getting the lead roles, you're like into it, you started to kind of build yourself into that dude. You will be more confident when you decide that you want to go talk to that cute girl who works in set design, right? You guys kind of look at each other a little bit. You're not confident enough to go talk to a girl yet. But hey, you know what? You're that actor. Like you've built up some confidence. You know what? You're going to eventually hold your chest up and you're going to walk over there and say hi with a higher degree of confidence than you would otherwise. Now, whether or not that works, again, you're going to have to spend, not political capital, you're going to have to spend some confidence in that conversation, and hopefully you get a return. If you don't, you go right back to acting. And you're going to build your confidence up more. You know what? It was maybe me a little bit. I could have maybe said something better, but you know what? I'm still going to, I can do that again. All right. Continuing with this momentum theory, let's remember Newton's second law. When things are already moving, it takes less and less effort in order to keep it going. And it takes less effort to actually build more momentum. All right? We lead to one success after another. And the more things that we can do confidently, or the more things that we can confidently contend at, within our social sphere, the more fulfilled we're going to feel. I encourage you to collect as many of those things as you can, right? I will be the alpha at these things. The more, the better. I'm trying to find out what those things are for my children right now. And they're all below the age of 5. Please excuse me for having to think about that for a second. But they're all younger than 5 years old. I'm still looking for that thing that they're going to be the alpha at. Why? Because I want to encourage them to do that. If they can contend early, they'll build that confidence early. If they build that confidence early, they'll build into different things and be willing to try new and cooler things, and hopefully build themselves into a more successful, more well-rounded person than I am. But there is a dark side to this, all right? Newton's third law: for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. All right. Now, there are some immediate connotations to this, but let's think with this, with regards to physicality, and motivation, or even more relatable, like let's say gambling. There are ups, when you're on a streak, like I can't lose, like this is awesome. And then there are downs where you just cannot seem to win. Believe me when I say that these are natural. But those lows must be weathered. For men, this can feel like you're failing at your cardinal responsibilities. Like the Hercules hold, in the world's strongest man competition. We must hold on to whatever we can. All right? If you guys haven't seen this, there are giant pillars, like stone pillars, like Greek pillars, that are angled away from this competitor who's standing on this pedestal. All right? And that competitor either holds on to handholds in the stone or holds on to chains as the supports up top get pulled away and the pillars are hoping to drop. And it looks like this guy is going to be pulled apart at the middle. All right? The athletes who do this the best have said they overcome the idea that they're being torn apart at the middle. And they overcome the challenge more and more successfully than the guys who actually have the stronger grip strength, right? The stronger muscles right here. I mean, they're just being torn apart. And I'll be honest with you, bad situations in life kind of feel like that. I'm slightly superstitious, and I'm not ashamed to say so. All right? When I'm interviewing for jobs, certain ties contain mojo. All right? They do. And this is how I perceive the world. There's one tie that I own that I love. The look, the color, design, everything about it. I love this tie. I cannot wear it to interviews anymore. Okay? I had a disastrous interview in that tie. All right? Like, shaken to my core results of this interview. And no matter the wins I've had in this tie, I've never quite done well enough. I cannot shake the bad feeling I get around this tie. It's never landed. I've never landed the job in that tie since. All right? I've tried a lot. I've even worn it to interviews, to places that were slam dunks, or to job interviews that I had the confidence in, but I knew I didn't really want the job. So I've worn that tie also to places where I could take more risk and kind of be bold and really gain something maybe, right? Anything to give it a win. And that's the important part. Wins are very important to break a cycle of failure, to curb momentum in the negative direction. You'll hear managers tell people they just need a little win. They need one win. Okay? During a bad day on the production floor, for example, where things don't seem like they're going to turn around, good people managers will focus on one thing. That one thing has to be an attainable goal that the team can rally behind. Like, hey, if all else fails, at least we got X accomplished. I had this moment with a newer team when I was at the very end of my supervisor career before I kind of made that jump to manager. And we had a situation where we're making dough, and this dough needs to like sit and rise, and the yeast needs to start doing its thing and make things rise just a little bit. So we call that process proofing. So so the proofing room went down. So it's a giant room that it's probably about as long as my house is, and that room is designed to take dough, like these dough presses, these little pads of dough, and let them rise at a specific temperature and a specific time. Okay, all moving through a production facility, so everything's moving. Well, when that goes down, the bakery stops. Like during a bad day in the production floor, where things, it's just, unfortunately, you have those. They're called A pieces of equipment. So if this specific machine goes down, the whole process stops. Okay, that's an A class piece of equipment. Okay, you can ask any maintenance guy this. Okay, when that happens, especially in a bakery, that's an A piece of equipment. The line stops. No more producing. Now, unfortunately, with several thousand pounds of dough in process, we need to act quickly. Now, with the producer, again, the bakery shut down. Now, with our days completely shot, there's something that we could do to ensure that first shift that came in after us wasn't hampered by our lack of progress or our stopped progress. What was that? Clear out the system. So I will tell you, dough in a proofer is rising. All right. So imagine you've got this little brick of dough. Well, unfortunately, that's going to double in size here in like an hour. So where I'm at the top of this raised scissor lift, and I'm chopping like 15-pound hunks of oily dough and dropping it into these giant moving totes. And when we're done with that, we get down, we ran out of totes. We got to push them, these thousands of pounds. We got to weigh all of it and record it for loss purposes, push it across the plant, dump it, bring it back. And now we've got more totes where we can continue to chop up these thousands of pounds of dough off this line so that we didn't have this, because if it proves too long, it's bad dough. It won't create the product that we want. And actually, I'll teach you guys this for free. In cereal chemistry, so in flour and dough chemistry, there's a principle that the dough always remembers. All right? So whatever you do to that dough will ultimately affect the end product. All right? So if you got a guy who's like mushing and he's like doing all this Play-Doh-y stuff to this dough, if he does that for too long, it will have a different outcome than when you do it for the precise amount of time. Baking is a very precise art. So I say that we have in production, we have a whole line of stuff that's been sitting at temperature for too long without the right stuff being done. It's not going to give us what we want that the customer, you, would eat. Right? So I got to get it all off the line. So these thousands of pounds come off. It took several hours in a hot, humid room in order to get everything cleared, lifting this heavy, constantly expanding dough. But the job got done. Now, first shift comes in, cocked and ready to start production when the proofer is functioning. Okay, for production employees, all the actions they do, we want to actually see an output. Right? So if they're doing all this work to get nothing out of it, just to get back to normal, that's viewed as negative momentum. What we provided was momentum in the right direction. Hey, there's nothing in your way. Maintenance is going to be fixing this real quick. They get it fixed in an hour. You guys are up and running. All right? And with that little push, that momentum grows. These wins must contain the right amount of mass, like we talked about. Something too small won't change the course of the day. Right? If we picked one thing to make sure that we got done, hey, let's make sure everything's clean. Right? That's not gonna. It's a thing, but that's not something big enough to move to change the perception of our day. Right? A good manager will be able to identify the right opportunities that will positively impact the employee base. All right. So to do this in our personal lives, We need to view this in the right way. Now, one win is all you need to start things off in the right direction. Now, that's why this one win methodology is how we fight off depression. It's how we fight off sloth and get us in the right emotionally right place so that we can get through turbulent times. You focus on one win. Now, your ability to weather storms like this will mark you as the leaders that you really are. All right. Now, for the guy out there that is in his shirt, busy doing nothing, your loved ones should encourage you to get out and do something, anything. Okay. Now, you might be the best keyboard warrior out there, and I'm not knocking that. That can be fun, but the motivation needs to translate into something physical or something that we're actually doing. All right. Now, one activity can change busy doing nothing into making something of yourself. Okay. Being busy doing nothing is not acceptable. Nothing is not acceptable. The antithesis of sloth is diligence. Diligent men are responsible men. Responsible men are men you can trust. Now, be worth that trust. That's our show, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski. Thank you very much for joining us today. If you liked this episode, please follow and subscribe to the show for free. We're on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Rumble, and wherever else you get your content. Good luck out there.